The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform, multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Kirk Marple about unstructured data, his new product Unstruct Data, and why he chose to use .NET to build something which makes heavy use of machine learning. Along the way, Kirk shares a whole bunch of lessons and experiences from his career, which goes all the way back to 1994 when he started at Microsoft. He shares a number of stories and bits of advice about things like building minimal viable products, entrepreneurism, ideas and where they come from, and whether your product really does need to be cross-cloud. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let this show begin. So first thing I'd like to say, Kirk, is thank you ever so much for taking some time to speak with me and the listeners. I say this to everyone, but I genuinely mean it, that I'm really appreciative of anyone who is willing to spend some time to put up with me for 90 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever. But also for sharing that knowledge, right? Because I feel like the current season of the show is all about let's share knowledge. Let's just because every single person has a lesson to share, regardless of where you are on your journey in development. I feel like if you're right at the beginning, if you're maybe I've got a few friends that are in like the middle management stage, a few friends that are right up in retirement stage. Wherever you are on that journey, there is a lesson for you, and I'm sure that you have a lesson to share. So, I really greatly appreciate whenever anyone spends time on the show.
Oh, well, thanks so much. I mean, I love the show. I listen very often, so it's really a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you very much, Kirk. That's very kind of you. So I was wondering, before we get started, would you mind giving the listeners maybe an elevator pitch introduction to Kirk, the man, the myth, the legend? Is that all right?
Yep. No, I'd love to. So, I always kind of call myself a career software developer. I got started in the early days. Was doing some crazy like Fortran and different things like that at my first job, working for a government contractor, and then quickly moved into being a C++ programmer for years, and always been in the Windows stack, for better or for worse, and ended up, going through management, being a lead, and doing my master's in CS, and then starting companies. And still a dev. I still consider myself a dev today. I'm actively coding even as being a CEO, but I wouldn't really have it any other way.
Excellent. I'm very much the same. I want to be slinging code. I want to be making something, right? You show me an empty IDE and I see all the potential, right? I am in no way an artist, but I feel like it might be similar to when a painter or a sculptor sees the blank canvas, and you're like, wow, if I do this and this and this, look at what I can create. But I'm a terrible developer, so
that creative side is, just getting in that flow, and just being able to be like, hey, I don't know where I'm going to be in an hour or two, but I'll figure it out on the way. I always describe it as more like sculpting. You have this kind of raw thing and you're just hacking away at it. And then you're getting down to that level of detail. And I love that part. That's why I would have a really hard time just not coding anymore. So.
Yep. And I think I read I've been reading a lot of, books in and around the development space recently. And one of them was a book called Managing Humans. And the author, they're talking about what if you get into that management space after having been an engineer or a technical person. and specifically from like a development background. And he says, don't stop coding. He says, don't do it every single day as your job, but maybe,
Right.
find an hour on a weekend just to write, look into what React is or something like that.
Yeah.
Because then the idea is that, at least the idea that he's postulating is, positing, sorry. So the idea that he's positing is that by keeping an active interest in it, even if you're no longer interested in doing it, you have that sort of connection and you can have that empathy with your direct reports, right? So when they say it can't be done, or when they say it's going to take a week, you're able to then go, you know what, you're the experts. I've seen some of the stuff you've had to do and I appreciate it. It's going to take a week. I'll go and explain that to whoever. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. I don't consider myself a front end dev, but I've done enough in the past. And our team is doing React right now, but my front end experience was all ASP.NET and core, but the concepts are pretty much the same. So, when they can talk about, okay, it's this or this, or I can talk component models, I can talk templating or whatever. But I don't get in the mix. On the back end, I'm way more opinionated, but I think you got to be a bit of a generalist even to, appreciate the bits and pieces. Like I just set up CDNs last week and it's like, hey, it's not a normal part of my job per se, but it's like, you got to have a little bit of taste of everything. How cloud storage works, how networks work, and then even if you're not doing the work directly, you can sort of, manage and advise better. So.
Sure, and I feel like I personally feel like that's where the difference between, say, a mid-level developer and someone who is a senior or lead or anything like that is not just the amount of years of experience, but that breadth of experience. Yeah, I've played around with machine learning, or I've been, like you said, I'm setting up CDNs, I'm doing DNS records because it's always DNS. All these kinds of things, right? And that to me is someone who has a senior level or anything like that, because my excuse me, I just moved the microphone. My view of that is that you can't really, I feel like you can't really lead a team of people until you've had enough experience to know where the potential pitfalls are, or indeed to say, hey, I was picking on React, right? Oh, well, we want to use React. Well, actually, Vue might fit better, or or maybe we don't even need a SPA framework at all. Some projects you don't, and that's just having the experience of poking at these things. It allows you to make that decision, right?
Exactly. Even things like authentication or things like that, and it's like you got to do the pain, and you kind of go back to tools you're familiar with, like we use Auth0 and stuff like that. But just you're always in the weeds with something like that, and a lot of it's configuration. And the company we have. I brought over developers that I worked with at a couple of companies, and we all are like, okay, well, we know how to solve this because we did it at the last company, or we know how to solve this. But then there's times when you want to investigate something new. Like we're doing stuff here that we've never done before. And so I just let them run with the things that I know I don't have to question. And then the other stuff I'll try and sort of think about a little bit more. So.
Sure. And I think maybe that's one of the things that people, when they get to a senior level, say like someone in your position, you surround yourself with those experts, right? You surround yourself with the person who's like, hey, this person knows machine learning. Hey, this person really knows Azure. This person really knows Docker or whatever. And you turn to them, right? Because they are the experts. That's why you hired them, right?
Exactly. And that's what, I had prototyped and kind of built the back end of our product before starting the company just on my own. And then I went and said, oh, okay, hire the best front end devs that I know because we need a UI. And it's just an area that I'm not as good at. Like I have a bit of an opinion, but they just cranked it out. And it's just, it's solid and it's functional, and the bugs we have are nothing. They're just usually visual and little things, but it's for a very small team. You got to have good people around you.
Every project has bugs, right? So we'll just breeze past that. Right? Everything, I'm pretty sure even Hello World fails at some point during a nanosecond
when you run out of disk
thunderstorm.
Right. That's still a possibility. So.
Or you don't turn your computer on. is bugged out, right?
Yep. Yep. No, it's true.
So we were saying there about surrounding yourselves with experts who know the different tools and techniques you need to solve the problems that you're solving to build the software. And I was wondering, because you've mentioned a few times about this product that you're building.
Hmm.
You were saying just before we started recording, you were about to hit 1.0, which
Yeah.
is amazing. So congratulations on that.
Mhm.
But what I will say is because of the pod, what did I used to call it? The Timecast pod machine wibbly wobbliness. We are
Yeah.
now talking in the past, right? So for the
Yeah.
listeners,
Hopefully
perhaps,
hopefully we'll have shipped
yeah.
already.
Yeah, so I was wondering, can you give us a little bit of an introduction to the software that the
Yeah.
package, the system you're shipping, and then I'll ask a little bit about the technology behind it because I've got a few questions about that, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is, and so my background was in media entertainment. I'd worked in like broadcast video and software and things like that. And so we had these tools called media asset management systems. That would be like you put your video in there, you could search, you could filter, you could do processing on it. And so I had built a company around that. But this is kind of another layer of an onion skin around that, where it's not just video, it's audio, documents, 3D geometry, point clouds, even data files. And so I kind of look at it as like a really broad media management tool that has ML built in for enriching the data set. So we basically handle the data ingestion side automatically and then automatically create a knowledge graph from all the data, basically the metadata that's in the files, as well as things we extract via ML. So that would be audio transcription, computer vision, NLP for documents, and then that goes back into the graph. And then the customers can do data discovery, so essentially a search on top of it, but also analytics and visualization. So you could basically, everything has a geospatial element and a time element to it. So they can say, show me all the images flown by this kind of drone in the last 6 months in this geofenced region where I saw a building. You could do complex queries like that. So that's what the UI does. It's really nice. I mean, it's kind of like a sort of, if you're familiar with like Tableau or ThoughtSpot or something like that, for the structured data world, we do that for the unstructured data world. And then the other part is automation. So alerting. So we can say, hey, when a tag has been applied to a file, hit me on Slack or something like that. And so we'll get more complex with that in the future. So we just started, that's a new feature now where we can hit a webhook or Slack and really to connect to the business workflows. And the concept there would be like data triage. So they might be uploading or capturing a lot of data and they want to be like, oh, I saw water pooling on my maintenance run. We can automatically flag the manager in a Slack channel saying, oh, look, here's all the history of water pooling. We can give like a daily summary of things like that. So really it's a pretty big swing. I mean, it's a data platform for we call it for real world assets or real world places. And it could be like aerial surveying, drone surveying, construction, really anything across the board. And we really treat it as like a knowledge hub for the enterprise or the companies where, because the biggest thing is there are a lot of companies doing this for maybe just imagery, but we're actually cross-referencing like a Zoom meeting and a document and a 3D file and things like that into this knowledge graph, which is pretty unique, we think.
I like that. There's a couple of things that I kind of want to cover about that. So you mentioned early on about media management systems,
Mhm.
and in my head, I have this example that I know of that the BBC have, and it's all human curated, right? It's all people
Mhm.
curated. So my understanding is that the BBC, obviously, they have a huge collection of,
Mhm.
a huge library of audio, video, whatever it is that they've ever recorded, ever made,
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. And my understanding is that they have a team of researchers who catalog, oh,
Mhm.
in this footage at this time period, there's a shot of some, maybe some swans, or
Mhm.
there's a
Mhm.
lion yawning or whatever.
Yep.
So if you're making something for the BBC and you say, I need some library footage, it needs to be a lion, and it needs to be yawning, and it needs to be sunset, they'll go, right, we've got you, and they'll go over there and find
Yep.
that footage. Is that kind of
I mean, we
a
could
vague
basically do that.
idea of,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the
okay.
product today, um, you could do video. I mean, we would extract the scenes. we're using technical on the technical side. We're using Azure Video Indexer for that, and that gives, I mean, actually a ton of metadata back. I mean, it gives emotion in the speech. It gives object identification. It's a really powerful tool. So we take that metadata and then basically create the graph from that metadata, that the analysis metadata, and yeah, I mean that essentially we could do that same kind of search. And what we often say is the customers want to find their interesting sort of tidbits in the data, and that's really where the ML comes into play. And that's why we have a good partner program where we can plug in any ML models from different sources. So we've done partnerships with RoboFlow and Assembly AI and Primer AI for different algorithms they have. So we're not really in the business of creating the ML algorithms, but we're plugging them in, just like I used to plug codecs in the video world, and you just license them from different vendors. There's a lot of commoditization happening in ML. So we just want to be able to plug all those pipelines in and then take the results of that and federate that back into the knowledge graph. Because, I mean, there's vertical companies that maybe they're in vegetation or something like that. They do a lot of computer vision models for that. If we can get access to that as an API, we can easily plug it in. I mean, it could be like a day or two's job on our side and just boop, like it's right in there. We add like connectors to the different pipelines. We have rules, like set up rules to say, for an image that you see within this geospace, run this model on it. And that's where it gets super powerful. And we don't have to sort of, I mean, do everything at that point, but we can just have a really good partner program to work with.
See, that this is in my head. I'm starting to see like how this could be good for like the big companies, right? Some of the people that I've recently worked with have been multinational enterprises, right? And when you're on a team of 5 people, and there are 1 million people hired by the company, the amount of data that they must be generating on a daily basis through meetings, through Slack messages, through maybe Confluence or wikis or something like that, and like it's all disparate, right? You only you only know about the data if you were either involved in creating it or if you were involved in maybe editing it, right? But I can imagine that taking an entire enterprise's like all of its data and just saying, right, okay, when was the meeting held to decide when this flagship product is going to ship? And then who do we need to disseminate that to? I can imagine that being from the user's perspective, a relatively simple sort of search to do. You know, we were talking about Project X. It was roughly within these 3 months. I'm really simplifying the problem you're trying to solve here. I do apologize. But like you can then extract from that. You can extract maybe sentiment from that. Hey, you know, everyone was really stressed because the 2.0 was about to drop, but we had all these bugs, and then maybe an external third party we were hoping we could work with pulled out or whatever. So I could see how you could pull all of this information that seemingly is unrelated, but is related, right?
And the other interesting part, really, I had an opinion about it originally, is the enrichment of that data. So we kind of map to, there's this thing called schema.org. That's kind of a standard. It's what JSON LD and Google uses for their knowledge graph, but it's just a schema for people, places, things. So we map everything to that. And so we canonicalize that data. And then we could say, the ML found a person. And sure, it's a term. It just would have my name, but it would identify it. And then what we could do is recursively enrich that. So we could say, we see a person, go call, I don't know, LinkedIn API and enrich with that information. They're like almost a spidering. And what we want to do is, we do that automatically for places today. We call Google Places API and get it if you put in a term, we'll find the lat long and do some things like that. But over time, what we want to make the system pluggable, where you can be like, and I actually had an investor ask me this, is like, could I put in my Zoom meetings with my founder companies, and it could find the terms of the companies and go look them up on Crunchbase or in our CRM or something like that. And I was like almost. We're like that far away. We have almost all that built. We would just have to have a way to plug in API enrichment, data enrichment. And we kind of do it. You could hit a webhook today, and then with our GraphQL API, you could post us back But we're looking at some other ways to do that. But yeah, our goal is really to make this completely pluggable, that it doesn't have to be the kind of verticals that we're maybe targeting right now. The vision is like it's an unstructured data platform for everything, and that is really. But you gotta bite off like a little bit of it at the start. So yeah, no, it's really fun stuff. I mean, I'd been building a podcast discovery platform kind of based on this technology is just nights and weekends, and that's what kind of drove a lot of this kind of data enrichment and spidering concept and things like that.
Excellent. Well, what I've realized so far is we haven't really even said what the name of the product is.
Oh, yeah.
So let's just quickly say that, and then I've got some questions about the technology you used to build it.
So the company name is Unstruct Data, and it's Unstruct Data Platform. Pretty simple. So it really is treating it more like a horizontal platform, like like a Spark or a Snowflake or something like that is really what we're aiming at. We do have a really nice UI. That is kind of a built-in analytics tool on top of that. But it's basically a consumption, you pay by consumption data platform. We're selling it like that. And but yeah, it's right now it's pretty much the company and the product are pretty much the same thing. But we do anticipate maybe over time we'll have some other verticals that we can spin into and make some more focused products as well.
Excellent. Okay. So here's the potential sticky problem, right? There's nothing wrong with .NET. I love .NET. That's why I started this show, right?
Yeah.
But why .NET?
My team will probably laugh if I say something different, but it's personal preference. Somewhere I always get in sort of fun arguments with some members of my team about like JavaScript or versus .NET Core and C# and things like that. But I've been a C# developer for 20 years. Since .NET 1.0 beta. It's what I'm comfortable with, and it's what I built a couple 100,000 lines of code in for the last 5 years of my life, just nights and weekends. And so we had a really big code base, on the back end. So that was one of the big reasons. It just there would have been no sense to try and rewrite it in anything. But that said, I'm also very opinionated that I think it is really a great back end development platform. And that, I don't know. I'll put it up against anything else out there really and it's reliable. The memory management's gotten so much better. The performance is really good. It really, and even just the NuGet package ecosystem is really solid in the open source ecosystem. Like we've used and contributed to a couple of packages for like metadata extraction and different things like that. And so I had built it in .NET frameworks originally, 4 point something, 5 at the time maybe or something. And then .NET Core just wasn't ready yet. And so it was about, 5 years ago maybe. And then I started to I'd update it every once in a while, look at it and go, oh, is it time to update yet? And finally there was a point where they hit enough of it that I was able to port the entire platform over to .NET Core. And since then, I think it was this past Christmas, I spent going up to .NET 6 maybe, or 5 or 6, whatever it was around then. And finally got everything migrated and just pushed over, and we're all Azure Functions. And I had actually written this originally using Service Fabric, but then realized since I was paying for it myself, I didn't like paying for a cluster sitting around that I'd only use on the weekends. And so that at some point a couple of years ago, I ported everything to Functions, and it's been great. We use durable functions, we use durable entities, we use Event Grid and Event Hub as well. So we're pretty much, it's a fully managed environment, and use Azure DevOps for CI/CD. So I'm a solo backend developer on most of it, and so it's an efficient system for us.
Sure. There's a couple of points that I'd like to make, and maybe a question or two on just that, and that's I love that you picked .NET because you were already productive in it, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. And I think I've been saying this a whole bunch to juniors, mentors, to people who are not even developers. I'm on a bunch of Discords, and everybody's talking about, oh, you should have a Mac, you should have a Windows, you should have a Linux, and I jump in and I say, look, everyone, I had my last argument about you should have about 15 years ago, right?
Yep.
What you should do is use the tool that you are most productive in to
Yeah.
solve the problem that you are wanting to solve. And if there is nothing in, like, let's say, let's say Linux versus Windows versus Mac, right? Well, if you are, say, in the creative industries and you're working alongside people who use Photoshop, you want to be Windows or Mac because Photoshop
Mhm.
is available for Windows or Mac. Yes,
Yep.
the GNU image manipulation program is compatible with it, but there will be corner cases that you can't do
Yeah.
because other people can because they've got the right tools. If the tools aren't there, don't use it, right? But use whatever you are most productive in, because I'm sure you'll appreciate this, Kirk. The customer, the client, whoever you're building the software for, doesn't care what you've built it in.
No, no. They care about reliability, speed, things like that. And I mean, and these days, I mean, there's not that much of a cost difference, I guess. I mean, even running, I mean, like Linux containers versus Windows, I mean, there's definitely, it's not a trivial difference. I mean, if you're really at scale, I get that. I mean, we're still running on Windows Azure Functions today. I haven't done the work to flip it over to Linux ones, but I think it should work. Generally, it's probably more like our code, I think, should work. It's probably more packages we use maybe aren't compatible, but we just haven't done the. I mean, I think if we would get to the next level where we really start to scale, we would then go and it would be an optimization at that point. But I mean, for us, it runs well. I mean, it already, since we're on .NET 6, I mean, it's one less thing, headache. And I mean, no one, yeah, our customers wouldn't know. And I mean, my video transcoding company I had was all .NET, I mean, based and COM DLLs for the codecs and things. So, I mean, we're doing like COM interop and things like that and back in the day. And most of the other tools out there were Linux based and I mean, or Mac based, but had a functional company that broadcasters used and it was all running on .NET. So, I mean, it can be done.
Yeah, and I think that not to, my personal opinion, not to upset anyone at all. You're all wonderful developers, I'm sure. And when I meet you all, you'll be able to prove it to me, and I will believe you all. But like your code, and I'm doing this visually, right? So imagine you've got a stack of things everywhere. Imagine maybe a ladder, right? Your code is right at the top.
Yeah.
Underneath your code is the framework. If the framework isn't very good, your code isn't going to be very good. The framework runs on top of the operating system. If the operating system is no good, the framework's going to be no good, your code is going to be no good. Doesn't matter how much optimization you do on your code, it's still got at least those two layers. Then underneath that, there's the infrastructure, right? Assuming you're running on bare metal. And so if the infrastructure is no good, then the operating system, you can see what I mean, right? There's multiple levels between you and the silicon.
Well, I mean, one of the things I learned having my last company is, I mean, just at the storage and networking layer, I mean, so much of the optimization and performance can really come. I mean, video transcoding is very IO heavy and core heavy. I mean, we were running on like 32, 64 core systems. It was all on-prem, like bare metal. And I mean, I would basically have to tune everything to really, I mean, just make sure we were parallelizing and multi-threading and how much RAM are we using. And we dealt a lot with like NASs and SANs and all that storage and like even dealing with like, oh, should we be on InfiniBand or like different things? And honestly, changes we made at that infrastructure layer, the code would just take advantage of it. And so the code was already optimized enough, but we really could tune how much like, okay, well, what kind of RAID were they running and this and that. And I don't know, maybe this is an old fogey kind of thing to say, but I think a lot of developers today just don't even think about at that level, like performance, tuning, and just getting down to the level of, I mean, it works. I mean, just spin up more servers, like to run it on. And they're not doing, like, I grew up as a Windows developer for years, and you really had to tune and do perf testing and profiling. And I think a bit of that essence has gone away. I mean, in like, a lot of the newer programming frameworks and things like that. So, I mean, I tend to really, I mean, look at like, right, it's what I'm doing this week is just going through the logs on application insights and a really fine tooth comb, looking for, I mean, duplicate calls we're making and I mean, how many RUs we're taking on Cosmos DB. And because that's where the meat is, because when you scale, how are we going to get to 100 customers running thousands of files at once? if little chunks of code are taking 5 seconds, not 50 milliseconds. And so, but I don't know. I'm probably weird that I really like that kind of perf tuning and testing, but it makes a huge difference. I mean, for as you scale out.
Sure, and I think perhaps the what's the word I'm looking for? It's like it's almost like that tantalization of just like you said, we'll just scale. It doesn't matter. We'll add another couple of CPUs to it. Well, because like if you're in the cloud, it's just a sliding scale. You slide the scale, you hit apply, and it's almost instantaneously there.
You see dollars flow out of your wallet. That's the downside that people don't. Yeah. and I think it's, I mean, being an entrepreneur and at a smaller scale, I mean, like how much our cost of goods matters. I mean, for our pricing model, if it costs us $25,000 a month just to run our product, I mean, that's how many customers we have to get to beat our cost of goods. And I mean, we're maybe like $1,000 a month right now just to have all the lights on, but that can scale out pretty far. I mean, because we get Cosmos DB auto scaling and we have, all the Event Hub scaling. And I mean, our baseline cost of goods really isn't that high. And it's honestly like, I mean, things like app service and media services that we use, and those are some of the bigger flat rate costs, really.
Mm-hmm. And I guess all it takes, and this is something that comes up in a lot of the user groups that I go to. Some of the user groups I go to are non-technical, and I do definitely recommend that developers go to non-technical user groups. So like I go to used to attend a WordPress a WordPress user group for non-technical users. And they used to have people come in and say, okay, so the day that your website goes viral, because anything can happen, the day your website goes viral and your hosting costs go through the roof, what do we do, right? And that's, and I'm going to use the bunny quotes, I wish not to offend anyone, that's just for someone who has maybe a photography blog or a current affairs blog or something, right? So I can't even imagine with a system like yours or any of your other big competitors, I can't even imagine, like, your first PR goes out, everybody hits the website, you sign a million really big customers, and then all of a sudden, up go your operating costs, right?
Yeah. Well, because we're at the point now where we're giving away basically 10 terabytes of data with our baseline. So we just launched an Azure Marketplace this last week, and working with them to get co-sell ready and do all those sales things. But once we actually get the organic signups open, everybody that signs up could use up 10 terabytes of storage and all that. And so we got to really, think about, we need the customers just to play with it and get the feedback, but we also don't want to, like literally last night, I just implemented storage quota. And so we can at least make sure that it can't run too wild. And so it's an important part of it too, but I think you gotta, there's always that like MVP kind of pragmatism of like, okay, well, you don't have to do everything day one, just do it later. And maybe this is another old school kind of thing. Like I kind of build for performance and scale earlier, and anticipate it rather than refactoring it later. And there's always things we're going to do better later, but our baseline, I think, is actually really good. And it's, it hopefully will be once we get go live, but I think it's, you got to figure out how far on that scale you really want to be. And sure, we could have shipped something 9 months ago, but it would have been crap. And we really tried to put our best face forward, but it does take longer. And you gotta find that right balance for yourself and your company.
This episode of the .NET Core podcast is supported in part by Zoom Platform. Zoom Platform. No, not the video conferencing app. Zoom-platform.com. The premier DRM-free games portal. Unlike directionless larger stores, Zoom operates more like a boutique, offering all-time classics such as Duke Nukem, exclusive hidden gems like Hard War, and innovative indies like Wrecker Sunken Land. Zoom will even take requests and hunt games down for you. When Zoom signs titles, they make sure to get every release, version, language, you name it. That's how Zoom carves its niche. Zoom hand scans box art, manuals and other bonus content, and even records soundtracks. On top of all of this, Zoom always makes a point of securing the rights to obscure expansion packs and mods. When you buy the Zoom Platform Edition of a game, you know you are getting the most complete and definitive edition. Zoom's staff and technology are best in class. In fact, when competitors can't get a game running on modern hardware, they go directly to Zoom. They're some of Zoom's best customers. Zoom provides unparalleled 24/7 customer service and closeness with its user base. Zoom's management interacts directly with customers via Discord. They take their small business approach very seriously. Zoom-platform.com, your friendly neighborhood DRM-free game store. And if you end up on the Discord server, look me up because I'm in there too. Oh, definitely. I was talking to my friend and co-host of Tabs and Spaces, Zach, today about we were doing some pair programming and writing. He was writing his function. I was providing him a little feedback, and he's like, "This doesn't seem like the right way to do it, but we'll do it this way. Accept that technical debt and come back to it later, because what we were building was an MVP." And I feel like in some instances, I mean, you were saying that you prefer to build for not necessarily for stability, because everyone hopes for that, right?
Yeah.
Like you're building for stability and performance, but with different, it's different per industry, per target audience, right? You're hoping that your MVP can be scalable enough that when it does go viral, when 1 million people hit it and a billion gigaflops of data or whatever it is that you measure all this data in gets used, you can account for that. Whereas in the MVP that Zach and I were building, it was okay to go, well, you know what, doesn't really, we'll shave that yak later, we'll deal with that later. We need to get it out the door first, because in our instance, not in yours, but in our instance, it's like get it into the customer's hands. And then if it becomes a problem, or rather when it becomes a problem, we'll deal with it. And I think that those two viewpoints are equally as valid. I feel like maybe yours is a little bit more valid because you have more experience than me, right? But
I think it even is. I mean, and there are places in our product that we do that. Like there's places where I'm like, okay, we'll implement like one of these, like 1/8 of the functionality, but there's a pattern now that we've created that we know how to build the other 7. But it's tricky when you're building a platform, because it's like if people use a platform and it's terrible or it doesn't really work, I mean, they're never going to adopt it anyway. So and the scale and the performance, you got to figure out what your kind of KPIs are, like your key performance metrics are, and say, okay, those are things we really care about, and then things outside that box we just cut. And I mean, we were going to ship a couple extra integrations in this V1, and we're like, look, we just don't have enough testing time. There's a couple things we just said, look, fast follow. Well, you got to be able to like find that line, know that you have the pattern that you can add things back later really quickly. But I mean, for me, it's a classic like object-oriented kind of pattern-based programming that, as long as, I mean, we really try to make sure the patterns are tight, and then we can kind of put meat on the bone later. So.
Sure, and that makes sense, right? And until you have the product in your hands, in someone else's hands, you don't know. You may not necessarily know which paths are the ones to focus on, right? And that's where like analytics and maybe user testing comes in. Yeah. Everyone talks about how the further away from the developer's fingers the code gets, the more expensive it is to fix. But also, there are just some things you can't test until you get it into the user's hands. We were talking about it just before off air, just earlier on today, about how there are just some things you can't. There's going to be some edge case, right? Someone's going to upload some data you've never seen before, and then you go, "Huh, that was interesting. Now we need to go and fix this bug,"
Well, I think we may have talked about this before, but it was a month or two ago. I found this issue with durable functions and event hub triggers and something like that. And it was basically it's just like a really weird bug that I thought was on me, and ended up being this really special weird use case. And it ended up, I just had to roll back the Microsoft package to the previous version, and it went away. And how do you anticipate that in a schedule? Like I literally blew an entire weekend, probably 20 hours of fighting this thing and trying to figure it out. And then there's actually a GitHub issue on it, and they're still looking into it. I mean, it's a really strange use case in their engine that I don't know how I hit. It seemed like I was doing really normal stuff. And I mean, and that's the kind of stuff where it's like, I mean, I was trying to get all these features done and then literally just got sidelined. And so you got to be able to, plan to have that buffer and just be able to roll with those kind of things because they're always going to happen and at the worst times too. So.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like some of the problems that I now, obviously, they're on a much smaller scale, right? But some of the problems I've had in the past are when that dependency has flipped from
Yeah.
1.0 to 1.1, and you're like, oh my goodness. Look at .NET Core 1.0, Project JSON. Everything's going to be JSON. Don't worry about it. And then 1.1, which I felt was a major step in what they did.
I remember.
No, don't worry. We'll go back to CS Proj. And it's like, but that's a huge step. What are you doing?
That was crazy. I was thinking about porting it, and then I think I'd put it on ice for a little while just because I was like, let me let this just shake out. This is just crazy. But yeah, I had forgotten about that. It was really interesting. But no, there's definitely things. There's a couple, there's probably 2 packages in our system right now that I can't upgrade. It's just one of them, it's an open source thing that just breaks something with the Cosmos DB, and I just looked into it for a while, and then I'm like, I have no idea. I'm just going to leave it this older version, but that's tech debt. You gotta go back and look at it someday. But it's also maybe I have to fork it. Maybe I have to actually get in there, and we've had to do that. We've had to fork a couple things, and some. I was just using this JSON RPC library that hadn't been touched in 2 years. And I was like, it's the only one out there that looks any good, but ended up having to fork it and clean it up a bit. So.
Sure. And I feel like there's how do I put it? There's an expectation, I guess, on open source with certain larger enterprises, right? Look at what happened earlier this year with Log4j, right?
Yeah.
And it was a horrible system. It was not the system. Let me try that again. It was a horrible situation, right? And my heart went out to all the people who had to support all of those systems. But the thing that I didn't quite sit well with me, but only because I'm not in that world of a huge enterprise that requires these fixes now, was I'd seen on Hacker News and things, people were receiving emails directly from companies. We are this multinational, massive company. You have created this open source project. We demand that you fix this issue right now. We stop it and you fix it.
Yeah.
We're not going to pay you. Just fix it. And I'm like, there's got to be some give and take,
Yeah. And it is a weird, I don't know, this is sort of a soapbox, but the idea of companies being built on open source software. And I still wonder, we are too, but companies that build platforms and there's not really a monetization strategy to go back to the people that wrote it originally. I could see if people getting VC funding for some new open source project. What about all the original contributors? I don't know how. I think that's going to shake out probably in coming years, and maybe through GitHub and things like that. I think there's some great ways, but I would love to. Have a revenue stream going back to the open source folks that we use. It's people's time. And it saved us, our developers, time. They should get paid in some way. So, I think we may see that shake out more over the coming years. So.
Maybe so. I feel like it's definitely a problem for smarter people than me to figure out, because I'm just an idiot, right? I'm happy to admit that.
No, that's something we've even donated to a couple projects just to, ask for things to be fixed or new features and stuff like that. But, it's a good, if you can work with the developers that are on these projects and then they'll get stuff done. For you, if you need a fix, like a Log4j fix or those kind of things. So it's, you gotta have the community and relationship side of it as well.
Sure. And I think I feel like it's a bit too much to just expect those open source devs to just go, you know what, I'm going to drop it. I'm going to stop working on the stuff that puts the food on my table and fix your problem, and I feel like that's a bit too much to just expect them to do that. That's,
the classic,
but again, sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I was listening to another podcast and they were talking about how there were some open source projects that then once they started getting picked up by enterprises, the enterprises were like, we need to pay you. We need support on this. And so I see that that's kind of how Databricks and a lot of these companies got started. But it's, as long as you have that monetization strategy of oh, okay, cool. Now we can pay for support and pay for features and things like that. it makes a lot of sense, but it's you got to have that structure in place.
Sure. Sure. So you'd mentioned something way at the beginning of this this recording, and I just want to go back to it because it's piqued my interest. You'd said that you had spent some time building a podcast discovery platform with the platform that you've built. And I was wondering, could you just go into that a little bit? Because obviously, as you can tell, I'm quite interested in audio stuff.
I still think it's a great idea. I mean, honestly, I'd love to. I mean, hopefully, we can take the same technology and still do this in the future. But so I had a little side company that after I sold my last company, I started working on some different things and had a little LLC that I just basically wrote code in. And the concept, so I was commuting up from LA to San Francisco every week for like 6 months. And I started to get into podcasts more, probably listened to several hours of them I was driving. And I started to realize like there's so much information in the podcast that just gets lost, that I forget. Like I can't take notes while I'm driving. And I mean, like somebody will mention a company or an article or something like that. I mean, even here, I've name dropped probably 10 companies already. And I was like, well, why couldn't you just use audio transcription and entity extraction to pull that out of the podcast? And I could kind of build a search engine over all the podcast data. And so I started, that's what got me down the knowledge graph route. And I mean, essentially it's the same tech that started this company and it worked. I mean, but the cool part about it is it could then spider to different things. So you could say, I mean, mention an article in show notes, because I would go to the RSS feed, pull the show notes, then go grab the HTML URL, the HTTP URL. I would go and look at a web page, do entity extraction on that, and I essentially built a web spider. And it was really cool where, I mean, I could go and like find albums and episodes of podcasts and people, places, things, that whole concept. And so I had this idea of what I called it back. I'm old enough to remember what a zine was, like back when we were all doing it on paper in college and stuff. And so I started this project called Zine, where it's basically like you could put media into a zine and create this sort of almost like a video editor, but it was a way that you could author once and publish many as a podcast, as a video, as a blog post, as a tweet. So it was kind of this, I guess you call it omni-channel thing where you could sort of, and it could be dynamic. So maybe it was almost like a dynamic magazine based on the data around, I mean, where you could kind of have a podcast that would be viewable automatically as a web page or with all the spidered links, or you could publish it as a video with more of an image sequence or different pieces, clips you could automatically pull in. So, I mean, that was my original thing. I still think it's a cool idea. It was hard to monetize. I mean, because it's like, if you're not Spotify or you're not Apple, I wasn't sure how to do it without having a custom client, because you need something to render it, or you have to find a standard. And so I thought I could render it as just an MP3, but you need like closed captioning links, like VTT or something like that for the links, the synchronized links. So I looked into that, but it was something. This is a nights and weekends project, so I mean, it was I was kind of like noodling on this for a while, and then had the chance to start the company, and was like, I'll just take the tech, built it for an industrial commercial use case. But I mean, I could literally go back and use it for that same project eventually as well.
That's what I love about people doing passion projects and things that they're interested in, right? When people come to me and say, I want to get started in development, but I don't know what to do, I say to them, look, okay, let's put the decision of choosing a language and a framework to one side. Tell me of a problem that you have that you wish you could do faster, and let's just build that, right? Because it's like a lot of people, and I'm the worst for this. I have no side projects going on because I'm terrible at coming up with ideas. So maybe I need to listen to this episode. But I feel like if you are able to identify a thing that you are interested in, a hobby, a problem that you want to solve, whatever, that kind of thing, then build a system to do that. Well, guess what? You just built yourself a side project. And if you found it useful, other people will too. You know, that's how like that's literally how BASIC was created by Bill Gates and how
Yeah.
Microsoft started.
It's so true. Like my other passion project, I mean, pre-pandemic was live music. I mean, just going to shows and stuff like that. And and part of the idea I had was, okay, I was living in Chicago and there was this great bar across the street that would have live music like 5 days a week. And I was always like, well, these are small bands. Like, I don't know if any of them are good. I don't know if their genre is good at all. Or, I mean, it's like, how do you have this concept of kind of seeing relationships of, okay, well, what other venues have they played at? Like, what bands have been on the bill with them? And even then maybe then going down and spidering, well, what articles have they been mentioned in, like a Pitchfork article or on a blog page or something like that? And coming up with those correlations, essentially it's almost like a personalization or recommendation engine. But that whole knowledge graph base, so I was actually thinking of building, have you ever heard of the product, the app Bands in Town, where it could kind of tell you what bands are playing locally? It was like a better Bands in Town was the concept. And it was more knowledge graph based and just more detailed. But it's still a tough thing to monetize. Like, I think it's one of those like solution in search of, the problem's there, but it's like, I was thinking of promotional sponsorships. Like advertising from I don't know, alcohol, company or something like that for a bar. I mean, those kind of things. I think there would be an angle there, but the tech was super interesting where maybe you could be like driving down the street and be like, oh, did you know there's a show next week, like at this place? And when I was living in LA, it hit me this one time. There's the Echo, which is a big concert hall is just down the street. And somebody played there that I would have loved to have seen. And just in all the ways of Twitter and all these things that I missed it. And I'm like,
Right.
That's dumb. Like, how we have the technology, how could I have not been alerted that my enough knowledge around me, like of my Spotify playlist, my all Twitter feed, all that stuff, should have known that I should have been interested in that. And so that was kind of the problem I was trying to solve.
That's see. So there's something you said there. We're getting a bit sidetracked, but I like it.
Yeah.
For folks who are maybe just getting started, maybe monetizing shouldn't be like my thing is build it first. What was that phrase? Build it and they will come. Is that the phrase? Right.
Yeah.
And for the folks at my level, right, we're a little bit smaller scale.
Yeah.
Where we come up with our little solo ideas, but build it first, and then my thing is, does it have to be monetized, right? I appreciate it's a lot of someone's effort and a lot of someone's time, and it's a passion project, but you don't always have to try and get money for.
And that was really on me. I mean, I was looking to start a new company, and so I knew I wanted to start a new company again, and and this is kind of that sculpting area. I didn't know where I was kind of getting to, but I was just learning, adding layers to this platform. I knew I could, and we can still do it with our platform. Like, I don't think we know where this is going to end up. I mean, we're gonna carve it and polish it and aim it at different directions. And I'm sure, we're gonna find a sweet spot. But at the start, you really don't know where it's gonna head. And so you want to give yourself the ability to adjust later and not just kind of have one shot. But yeah, excuse me. I think the best projects are passion projects where, people care more if it's something they're really interested in. And the media, I've always been in this media software space my whole career. So it just, that's something that I love. And it's, it's worked out for passion and commercial sides. So.
Sure. There was something that we mentioned when so peeking behind the curtain inside a baseball talk. I hope that's the right phrase.
Yeah.
We would before we do a recording, we have like a discovery call and chat about what we're going to chat about. It's almost like very meta. And there was something that I think you brought up, and I sort of ran with in our notes, and that was you'd said something about. Yeah, we're looking into maybe cross-cloud. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. How that's going to work? And I just wanted to get your opinion of should people be cross-cloud, right? We're talking about a system that you're building that's going to be, huge, right?
Yeah.
Does the mom and pop shop down the street that has a brochure website for their business, do they need to be cross-cloud?
No.
Where does that?
Yeah.
Where does it?
I think it's kind of what value do you need to extract out of it and why? Mm-hmm. I think I mean, cross cloud is great for, I mean, true resiliency. Like if you can't afford to have AWS go down and lose your business, or Azure go down, and I mean, but on the other hand, like if you're, and there's very, very few companies that probably care to that level. Like if AWS goes down, there's a lot of companies go down and people just kind of roll with it. I mean, because everybody's down. And so you're not really standing out in a crowd. And I think, I mean, I think part of it is probably a technology like flavor that people, I mean, people like there's some people who are AWS people and some people that are Azure people or GCP people. And I mean, even on my team, my front end guys are more AWS guys. And but they're so parallel. And sure, little things here and little things there are better. And we always like needle each other about those things of like what might be better on AWS or this and that, but they're really, really similar at the end of the day, probably 98% the same. And I mean, cost structure, they have to maintain competitiveness for cost structure. So the only reason we would look, or I mean, I think anybody from a mid-level company and down, they probably should just pick what they're productive with. Maybe and just pick a side. But at the huge companies, then it's really all about, I mean, you just got to stay up no matter what. I mean, if you're like PayPal or somebody like that, or I mean, Stripe or somebody that I'm sure they must have a cross. Maybe they don't. I mean, but I would assume they have a cross cloud, something that, I mean, they can make sure they stay up no matter what. So for us, it's not something, I mean, we are cross cloud from a data ingest standpoint, so we can pull from any cloud, but our repository and the code is running only on Azure. We are looking at doing cross cloud from a like, oh, you may want to run on the AWS version of us because your data is on AWS and maybe it's faster to ingest. I mean, we use so many managed services from Azure today that would actually be a pretty heavy lift. The code would generally port over. I mean, we wouldn't have to change the code too much, but it's all the stuff we talk to. And that would be where all the adapters to like Cosmos DB and this and that. And so, but I mean, we do have a thought of, I mean, well, okay, what about on-prem or what about a private cloud? And then that's an idea of, well, Kubernetes and Knative for function apps and stuff like that. But at this point, I mean, maybe we would do it in the future. If anything, we just should have started there. But I don't think Knative, at least with my research I've done, I don't think they're as advanced and far enough along to be truly cross-cloud. And I mean, Azure, so you still have to pick Lambda or Azure Functions, and there's just not enough of an ecosystem there. I think they're getting there. I would love to use them. But for us, it's just the way the DevOps is integrated and the way all it's integrated app insights, and the ecosystem just gives us a huge benefit there.
Sure. And I think you made a really, really good point there about if you're a medium business down, don't worry about it, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple of examples from the last 8 months at the time of recording that really sort of highlight that, right? There was a time when Facebook had a problem with DNS, right? Mm-hmm. No one could get on Facebook. Oh, no. But also, that was a big problem. But the bigger problem was Facebook's internal auth to get into the building used Facebook, right?
Yeah,
so the point I'm getting at is they have bigger problems than just you can't log on to Facebook.
I think there's probably people out there that are like, oh, that's horrible, you got to solve that. And then I'm a little more pragmatic. I'm like, people live. I mean, unless it's a live or die thing, I mean, people go get a cup of coffee while the DNS is down. And sure, there's people losing money, there's companies losing money and all that. But I mean, do you have to solve every problem in the world? And that's where I think you really need to be pragmatic about what can we really handle and what can't we? I mean, like CDN, like we just implemented a CDN in front of our storage. And for anybody out there, there's this great tool called Graph CDN. That's a GraphQL CDN that we just started using. I think it's built on top of Fastly, but it's super fast. But that gives us now a layer on top that we can now say, oh, look, this was something we cared about, that we really need to have quick response times, good caching. Now, are we region yet? And all about like Cosmos DB, are we set up for geo-replication? No, not yet. But those are areas that we can lean into more later. But for now, we cared more about performance. And so you just kind of have to pick your poison a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like that fits really well with. So, from my point of view, as someone who's not building hugely scalable stuff like yourself, um, that geo replication is something that I can aspire to attain, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
something that I desperately need, right? If a
Yeah.
user has to wait an extra half a second to get their record from the database for their to do app,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, they make it. I mean, we use Terraform for infrastructure as code, and I mean, it's for me. Mostly, it's just flipping another switch, rerunning Terraform, or just going and clicking a couple buttons in the Azure portal, and you have it. I mean, and so I mean, I think it's more. I always kind of go by the rule of, okay, know what's down the road, but don't assume that you have to drive down the road. And I think that's kind of the way I look at, I mean, our stuff. I always try to anticipate maybe a quarter ahead of what technology decisions we need to make and if we need to make any changes and things like that. But we don't necessarily have to start writing code for it yet. And that's why we have a great product team here that we do sort of talk through, okay, well, what's coming next? How do we anticipate? And then me more as the backend architect, I can be like, oh, okay, I need to refactor this a little bit or create a different pattern. And as I'm doing other stuff, I can kind of anticipate what's coming next. And so, I mean, I just wrote this new kind of job-based pattern for basically wrapping everything in a job that runs in a durable function, a durable entity actually. And it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, we don't use it for a million things yet, but I know this is just going to become like the core of everything we do for all these processing things. And so we bit the bullet, and then and that's when I hit that bug with durable task. And it was a huge project. I mean, of a lot of code and a week of heavy work. And I mean, but at the end of the day, now we're set up for the future, and now we have a brand new pattern that's just super solid, and we can run everything through.
I like it. I like it. I feel like I may have to pick your brains about the that job based architecture at a
Yeah, for
later
sure.
stage. Once you've proved it, that I don't want to say prove that it works, but prove the use case and prove that you can do other bits of the software with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a very big proponent of sort of like prototyping stuff. Can we do
Yeah,
it another way rather than just this way? Maybe in a feature branch, maybe on some other
yeah.
environment. Is it good? Brilliant. Okay, have we got the metrics to back that up? Brilliant. Then we'll go in that direction. I feel like it's more of a scientific approach. So like,
Mm-hmm.
let's travel down this path a little bit. If it proves to be no good, we can turn right back and come back.
Mm-hmm.
And all we've done is just dropped the number of hypotheses we have from 5 down to 4.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've made progress. We're progressing slowly towards the
Yeah.
correct way to do it, right?
Well, it's like, yeah, this pattern with durable entities I'd used for one thing already. We have this feed concept. It's kind of like a daemon that sits back and checks if there's anything new on S3. And if so, it just makes a request. And I was like, oh, well, I could just reuse that kind of polling, that kind of pattern for sort of long running jobs that, I mean, go are kicking off something. And it like, we're going to use it for ML training. So I need something there to watch because they don't have a webhook to watch and do that. And so then I started refactoring that. But then I started to realize our infrastructure was wrong, that you're supposed to put each of those in a separate function app for best performance. And because they each need their own storage account is what they suggest. So that ended up being a refactoring of Terraform and a refactoring of this and that. And so you think you get a pattern where you're like, oh, it's a little bit of code changes. And then you're like, oh, like this actually has all these other repercussions. But in the end of the day, it actually got us way better performance because now we've partitioned off the different sort of sections of our processing into different function apps. And so they can now scale independently. And so it's been interesting. I mean, just the progression of you don't see what's going to be coming next and things kind of change underneath you.
Yeah.
But for the good thing is, I mean, I'm always a big proponent of API extraction or not extraction, adaption, or where you basically, I mean, our front end doesn't care if I change it to that pattern. I mean, they talk to a GraphQL API. So we can really innovate on the back end and just, I mean, as long as the performance is good, I mean, you really can have those adaption layers, and for your teams, you can kind of, I mean, go at different paces and things like that is something we also look forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Any kind of binary API, so like across your classes, or rather across your interfaces, or a REST, gRPC, whatever API. The contract there doesn't need to know about the details, right? It doesn't need to know if it's .NET, doesn't need to know it's Java, doesn't need to know it's on Kubernetes, on AWS, or whatever, right? So yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. Excellent. So sorry, Kirk, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Oh well, I mean, what I was going to say is let's remind the listeners about the product, and that it is .NET, and that at the time of recording, you're right around the corner from 1.0, hopefully.
Yeah. So I mean, Unstruct Data Platform, it's actually up on Azure Marketplace. I mean, as of now, and will be at a time recording. And so it's we have basically a starter plan for the rest of the year that you could subscribe to there. But also just unstruct.com, our website. We have a contact form there for anybody that's interested. But yeah, I mean, we're super excited. I mean, we've been working about a year since we got seed funded. So it's, I guess, about 13 months since that time. We had a version, kind of an early access version in October of last year that we started getting feedback on, and then realized there's a lot to this product. And so we were like, look, we got to just like really get heads down for all of the last couple of months. And there's more stuff that's really important. And that's that classic MVP thing is, I mean, we thought, like, we took a stab and said, look, I mean, let's try and sell this part. And it was more of a search tool. There wasn't the automation. There wasn't the all the integrations. And the UI was it was a V1. I mean, it was like a 0.8 UI. And we've really done, I love the new UI, I think is great. And it's just crazy to think, like, I mean, how you find that line of what's shippable is really a moving target over time. And so, and you have to be confident. I mean, you can't, I do question, like, is this enough? Is it not enough? Do we lean in the right areas? But I mean, we've done enough customer discovery in the past years and at other companies I was at that I think, I mean, you got to have a gut feel about it. And I'm sure we're going to be wrong, but I want to be wrong in the right way, like sure. That we can adapt. And I don't think we're that far off the mark from the early feedback we've gotten. So, but it'll be, I mean, I just can't wait to have new feature suggestions coming through, like our product board portal. And that's when it gets fun, when people are like, that's cool, but can you do X, Y, and Z? Like, that's what I'm dying for right now. So.
Ace. So what about keeping up with you then, Kirk? What's the best way to do that? Are you on the socials? Are you open to people?
LinkedIn. Well, mostly I'm on LinkedIn every day. Just, I mean, reading and doing a lot of customer research, and I'm on Twitter. I mean, I mostly just post about like baseball and like stuff like that, but not too interesting there. But yeah, I mean, the company's on Twitter, just at Unstruck. I'm at Kirk Marple, but LinkedIn's where I kind of do my main business social stuff. Is the easiest way to get hold of me.
Excellent. Well, Kirk, it's been wonderful to chat with you today, and I genuinely, I always say this, right? I always say this at the end, that I have learned a ton, right? And I really have, right? And I do learn a ton from every episode, but more so for this one, I think, because there's a lot of, you've mentioned a lot of being pragmatic about what you're building, and not necessarily hitching to the right tech, but finding the tech that's right for you, I think, if you don't mind me saying that, right? That's what I've taken from this, and being able to find that almost anywhere you could find an idea for a product or a business or anything like that, almost anywhere. You just have to look, right? I loved your point there about discovering when your favorite band is in town, and how Spotify, Twitter, LinkedIn, all those social networks that are supposed to be tracking all this stuff, let you down.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, I've always been I worked at a radio station, DJ, when I was young, and it's always been around music. That's always been a passion. But it's like, once you start to see a pain point, and then you can be like, oh, I can apply all this stuff I know to this problem. And who knows? I mean, maybe someday I'll come back around to that. It's an evergreen idea, really. But I think, I mean, the pragmatism, I think, is a big, and just, I mean, developer productivity, I think, is an under kind of rated thing. Everybody's like, oh, you got to get PRs pushed, you got to do this, you got to do that. But I mean, does the team have the right tools? I mean, we're always, I mean, looking at different tooling, and like I was saying, I think before this, the recording of, there's a new QA tool we're using that we love called Reflect, and the team just, I mean, we were using another competitor, and they've gotten a boost from it, and it's just things like that. That if you could find the right sweet spot, you can carve out, I mean, a bunch of time in your day. But also, I mean, keeping an eye on it. I mean, there's things like our CI/CD workflow, I know, could be faster. And so you just got to be aware and look at those productivity areas that are valuable.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you ever so much, Kirk. I really
appreciate it
coming on and sharing your knowledge and experience with not just me, but with all the listeners, So I wish you the best of luck with Unstruck, and maybe we can talk about post version 1 when it comes out. If
yeah, I'd love to. No, I mean, hopefully we'll see where it ends up later this year. And no, we're, I mean, super excited about it. It's probably the most exciting time for a company to get a 1.0 out, and it's the hardest time probably too. But yeah, no, we're looking forward to it.
Ace. Well, thank you very much, Kirk. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks.
That was my interview with Kirk Marple. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/review for ways to do that, and to reach out via our contact page at .netcore.show/contact. And of course, to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you around real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.